Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and welcome to Cracking Addiction. And today we've got with us Mr. Jesse Ball, who is a person with lived experience. So, Jesse, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. And I want to start by asking you just to give a very brief overview of your personal journey and lived experience. What happened to you?
Well, hi, Fergal, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here. So, what happened to me, sort of throughout my lived experience, and why did I end up wanting to get into recovery?
Yeah, yeah. Just so that people can understand your context, and then we really want to start speaking about the recovery journey. But why are you passionately interested in recovery? That's really what we want to know.
Yeah, I think I find recovery fascinating and passionate because for a long time when I was in active addiction, it didn't really make any sense to me, and there's still a part that doesn't really make sense how I got clean.
Hmm.
There's a component to it where, yes, I was in enough pain to make a radical shift in my life. But there was also a component which I didn't quite understand. It's like there was another driving force which enabled me to get clean after years of using.
What was your substance of choice?
So I didn't discriminate when it came to drug use. I'd used essentially everything besides heroin. I never really got into. But
Yeah,
for me, it's whatever gave me the most relief. I enjoyed using drugs in combination, so they call it a poly drug user.
yeah,
But yeah, whatever gave me the most relief
right.
ultimately.
Okay. What was the driver for you to actually use these drugs initially?
Driver initially was fun,
Yeah,
curiosity. I think I
yeah,
started using when I was about 13, 14.
yeah.
Fit in. That was a big part of my story, like trying to got bullied a lot in year seven. And drugs made me feel like I fit in with the social group I was hanging out with at the time.
Hmm.
And then okay, by the time I got 18, 19, wasn't so much fun anymore. It was causing a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of shame. But by that stage, the driving force was I didn't want to look at myself anymore because I couldn't stop. So the driving force was shame and to escape myself, and that just sort of perpetuated into my mid 20s.
So that's not an uncommon story, is it? A lot of people listening can identify with this. So we've spoken many times in other fora, and you said something to me that really struck me. You said you just realized one day that you had to make a change. And I said, well, I wish we could bottle that. So this wasn't the first time that you'd been through detox rehab, was it? Well, you'd been through multiple episodes of care prior.
It was my first. I only went to the one rehab, but I
Yeah,
sought treatment prior through counselling, through
yeah,
YSAS when I was younger, and other services such as
yeah.
that. I saw lots of therapists, lots of life coaches, lots of high school counsellors.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I didn't think any of those people could understand me because like for me, using was a survival mechanism. At
Yeah,
first it was fun, like I mentioned, then it became a matter of survival, which
yeah.
I can see in hindsight. But back then, when I did seek treatment through therapy, I didn't feel like anyone would understand that I'm using substance to survive. And I think that was a product of being in enough pain where I realized I didn't have any other options. Like for me, it was I was looking down the barrel of death, prison, or rehab.
Wow. And that just came to you, that realization, did it?
Yeah, I think I love talking about this because for a while prior to that, I'd have moments of my active addiction where often it'd be after a big drug binge. So this might be the Monday or Tuesday where I just felt absolutely soulless, and I'd have like sounded like a distant whisper. It was some voice of intuition that you need to get sober and
Mm.
life will be a lot better. But
Mm.
then it'd disappear and I'd go back to using. And anyway, this would happen over over years and years. But that voice kind of
Mm.
it didn't necessarily become louder, but I became more convinced maybe that's the way forward, even though it terrified me.
So I just want to go back to something you said just earlier on. You said that you'd been through the mill in terms of seeing multiple professionals. but you were frightened or afraid that they wouldn't believe you that you needed these substances to survive. Can we talk about that? What was going on there?
A lot of the time when I saw, not all therapists, but definitely a few of them, I felt like
Mm.
I had the expectation that I need to stop using. That's why I'm there.
Yeah,
And often my mother would send me to these places, before I
yeah.
can turn into an adult. So I'd go to these sessions with the therapist with the expectations I've got to stop using, but I had a reservation deep down. I wasn't ready to stop. So there was some form of disconnection there as a result.
And did you feel disenfranchised in your relationship with these therapists? Did you feel stigmatized? Did they judge you? I mean, what? Because I personally believe that you got to meet people where they are, and I'm very happy with the concept of harm minimization as a valid intervention. So I'm just trying to square up my thinking versus your experience, and it doesn't seem to match, does it?
Yeah.
They were shoving abstinence down your throat effectively, and you weren't
Yeah.
ready for it.
It wasn't necessarily anything they would say. Maybe that's just how I felt. There were a couple of therapists. I remember one therapist said to me, we came to the conclusion that I use drugs after work to relax. And he
Yeah.
said to me, well, you know how I relax? He's like, I just have my cup of coffee in the morning and I sit
Yeah.
there and I enjoy it. And I remember thinking, like, I wish I could
Yeah.
do that. And when I got into recovery a few years ago, I remember one morning just sitting there with my coffee, and I finally knew what he meant.
Yeah.
It
But
took me a
you
while.
weren't there to receive his wisdom at that time.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't. And I remember seeing another therapist, probably the last one I saw ultimately before I got clean and went into sort of my last episode of binging drugs, or before things got to a really bad point. I remember seeing this therapist, and we're trying to work out strategies where I could improve my life. But I just knew, like, there was almost like another voice in my head saying, but I've just got to use one more time. It was so clear. It's like one more time. So it didn't matter what me and this therapist organized. I knew I was going to use again. And I felt like if I shared that with him, then there would be a pressure for me not to do that.
So what I'm hearing is you were going through this phase when you weren't ready for abstinence. People were encouraging abstinence, and you were frightened of it, weren't you? You just thought you could never be abstinent.
Yeah, correct.
Why?
I was terrified. I think for a long time, that's all I knew. From the age of 13, that's
Yeah.
how I fit in. That's all the friends I hanged out with. I think that's what my weekends were based around. Like I didn't really know any other form of socializing and having fun on the weekends without substance.
Mm,
And deep down, I don't know if I knew it back then, but I can see clearly now, I didn't want to look at the reasons I was using in the first place. I think that would have
mm.
been too overwhelming to address that all at once.
And so this voice you're talking about that wouldn't go away, it wasn't the loudest experience that you had, but the voice that wouldn't go away. What happened to that voice?
But I knew there was something there, like intuitively. It was like I now know it's something to do with like my spirit and my spiritual connection as a human.
Mhm.
I remember first sort of identifying with it when I was about 18 years old. Like, it sounds quite silly, but I remember watching this guy on YouTube talking about that he'd been sober for a couple of weeks and he was following his North Star.
Yeah.
And I was like showing my mate this video, and I just loved it. And he thought like I was losing the plot. He's like, "Why are you showing me this video about this guy talking about his North Star?" But I can see then it's like there was a part of me, maybe a wiser, higher self, that knew that drugs were destroying me.
Mhm.
It was very hard to listen to that voice because I had another voice telling me to keep using. Whether there was
Just
any,
one more time.
yeah, just one more time. Things will be different this time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, I mean, can we talk about, the delusions that you tell yourself, the lies you tell yourself about, oh, I can cope. Just one more time. I got this. I can handle this. I mean,
yeah,
I presume you went through all of that.
yeah, yeah. There's plenty of those. I have helped through 12-step programs to look at that stuff through the step work.
Yeah.
I think part of the step work is the 12 steps is looking at the delusions, the looking at the justifications, looking at all the bullshit we tell ourselves pretty much as addicts, to survive. Because the way I look at it, if I was walking around actually admitting to myself that I'm self-destructing, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So I came up with these delusions and lies such as, well, everybody uses drugs. It's normal. I now see, almost 4 years clean, that actually most people don't use drugs all the time.
Yeah.
I told myself that I needed them to have fun. I told myself that yeah, without substances, I wouldn't be okay. That I'm only going to use this weekend, then I'll stop the next weekend. I'll swap one substance for another.
Mm.
My substance use isn't as bad as this person. So a lot of comparison and yeah, justifying. I think a big justification towards the end was, well, this person hurt me, so I deserve to medicate myself.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So what harms did you experience as a result of your substance use?
My lungs copped it pretty bad. I was a premature baby, and I've always had asthma when I was young. It's quite a heavy smoker
Yeah.
from the age of 14, and just smoking various substances. I remember one of my
Yeah.
friends one day said, "You have the worst lungs I've ever heard in my life." And now I'm into long distance running. I haven't had a cigarette for years, but I think my lungs definitely copped it. I'm still quite young, about 29. Well, I'm 29 years old. So my body's quite resilient in that. I'm very
Mm.
grateful. But I think spiritually, that was the biggest harm. Like it just drained my soul addiction. It really, especially the last few years before I sought help. And probably one of the reasons I did seek help is because it stripped me back of my humanity. That's how it felt. I felt like an animal. I didn't feel human anymore. I felt like
Yeah.
my soul was just broken. And it's almost undescribable, that pain. And I think there's a certain, if other people with addiction are listening to this, they'll know what I'm talking about. There's a certain like despair and isolation in addiction and the loneliness. And I think the loneliness is actually the disconnection from self. That's the way I look at it. Like for
Yeah.
me, I got to a point where I was
Not
just
from others, but from self.
from myself. Yeah.
Right.
And that's
Right.
painful, man. Like walking around disconnected from your spirit or whatever you want to call it, that is very painful. And I think that was
Right.
the most harmful thing I did throughout my journey.
Mm.
Oh, and obviously like mental harm as well. Like definitely cognitively, it really screwed me up. I feel like it took my brain a while to recover, but
Mm.
I'm recovering. So
You had this experience of going into substances. You had this experience of flirting with therapy, and then something happened, and that voice that was advocating abstinence had more power, and I'd love to know exactly the mechanism of that.
I've thought about this quite a lot. So it's a little bit of a
Yeah.
story, but I'll try to say it quickly. Like essentially, I always thought one of my problems was I didn't have enough money. If I just had even like $1,000, my life would be okay. Because the way I used was I'd spend all my money and then be broke by Monday. Didn't even have fuel to put in my car or for lunch at work, and then I get paid Thursday and blow it all by Saturday night. You know, so I thought my problem would be fixed if I just had $1,000. Right?
Right.
Or if I just had more money so I could support my using. And that day finally came where I got a job which was quite well paid, worked night shift for a couple of months, and I had more money than I knew what to do with. And I thought, awesome. I had a big celebration after finishing that job. And what happened was I brought more drugs than I knew what to do with, and I used them. And within a few days, they stopped working. And no matter how much I used it, I didn't feel okay anymore. And I kind of hit this point, well, even if I use, I don't feel good. And if I don't use, I don't feel good. So I was kind of in this predicament, I suppose, which was really scary when that finally happened. And I remember leaving my friend's house at 2, 3 in the morning, and I looked up at the stars and I just prayed, like, if you get me home safely, because I was off my face and I was about to drive home.
Right.
I thought, if you get me home safely, I promise I'll stop using. But it,
Right.
it wasn't a it wasn't like bullshit. It was a genuine prayer, and I,
Yeah.
I really meant it. And really, what I was saying was, I'm in so much pain. Please just help me. I want this to
Right.
stop. And I got sober. I think about 2 months later, I went to rehab. But what happened was, I didn't stop that night. I then progressed into the worst month of my life, which I was just using flat out, almost in a way to self sabotage. So I'd have no other option than to go to
Mm.
rehab.
So, having made that promise to your soul, your spirit, your God,
Mm.
you then immediately broke it for a month. You just got wasted for the
Yeah,
next month.
Yeah.
So so you were in the middle of getting wasted again, and then you went to rehab. So there must have been another voice that said it's time to go to rehab.
Yeah. Well,
What happened there?
I think I knew like a few weeks into that. Yeah, I don't know what you'd call it. It's just pretty much a drug fueled rampage where, my mum was calling the police on me. I was essentially homeless, just living out of my car. I had a car to live in at the time. I called a rehab and booked myself in because I
Yeah,
knew that there were no other options left. I wasn't welcome back home. I just exhausted. It's kind of hard to, explain this quickly, but I just lost and fought and lost an exhausting battle with drug addiction the 10 years prior. It sort of just
mm,
hit ahead, and I was so terrified. And I called that rehab. So there must have been something inside of me that knew I needed help. And
yeah,
then what happened was when I got to that rehab, that voice I was talking about, it
yeah,
spoke to me so loud and so clearly that this is where you need to be. And it spoke to me through other people, it spoke to me through my counselor. I think most importantly, it was a spiritual and emotional and physical experience that I knew. It sounds strange, but I knew as soon as I walked in to rehab, like after a few days, that I'm going to be okay. And it was that same voice that had been telling me to stop all those years prior.
that's amazing. So how do we bottle that? What I'm hearing, it's your voice, it's your soul, your spirit
Yeah,
that enough's enough. It's time to grow up. It's time to get sober and start living.
yeah. I think
So
my
so
message is, if you have that voice, listen to it. If there's anyone that's listening and they hear that little whisper, I think maybe like I'd listen to it.
yeah.
Yeah,
So what advice would you give to therapists? I mean, I try and help people with substance use.
yeah.
And listening to you, it makes me wonder how many times have I started talking about the need for abstinence, and the other guy on the other end is just not hearing it. So what advice would you give me to help the next person?
Mm. I think meeting them where they're at is really important.
Yeah,
I'm currently studying counselling myself, and I'm actually in the middle of doing some peer support training for my job role.
yeah,
And we're learning in both those trainings that meeting people where they're at is really important. And there's this amazing video on YouTube. It's quite simple. It's the nail in the head we're watching, and
oh yeah, 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 yeah. Not
anyone
about
wants.
the nail. That's what it's called for anyone
Yeah,
watching.
it's not about the
Yeah,
nail. It's about a 2-minute video.
yeah,
It's a great way to demonstrate that often as humans we want to fix. It's in our nature. We see a
yeah,
problem,
yeah,
someone else in pain, we want to fix it. I
yeah,
think it's important to recognize most people that use substances in a way that's destructive, that is what they're actually using to cope. So if
yeah,
we take that away from them, they're not going to be able to cope initially.
yeah.
So even even bringing that up can be quite frightening for people.
Mm,
I think really just starting off to validate people where they're at and what they're
mm,
experiencing, and then allowing and holding space for them. I think that's really important too, because
mm,
a lot of the time it might be the first time they're actually speaking about why they're using. Like I reflect back on my interactions with treatment, and I would have loved it if someone just sat me down and said, "You can tell me why you're using, and I'm not going to try to tell you to stop. I just genuinely want to know, like, what do you actually benefit from using drugs?" And I
So
don't.
you're saying
Yeah,
it's important for the therapist to say, "I'm not expecting abstinence from you. Just tell me your story. Tell me your suffering. Tell me the
yeah,
reasons why you're using." That's important, is it?
yeah. I think that's important.
What other wisdom would you give therapists to help their patients other than meet them where they're at? What about their demeanor, the way they speak to people?
Trying to be open and understanding and patient, and really just being curious to why that person uses. You know,
Yeah,
like and
yeah.
actually,
Curiosity.
yeah. I think curiosity is really important. So it's obviously serving a purpose for them if they're doing it.
All right. Well, look, Jesse, we've run out of time tonight, but I really want to thank you for your wisdom, your bravery in telling your story, and I really look forward to exploring more of your recovery journey. But for now, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
That's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.